I consider it a great honor and a privilege to be here. It's only been a few years ago that I really began to seriously consider this possibility that my Sluders were descendants of Heinrich Schlüchter, who was a significant person in the second colony, more so than you might think. And I will explain as we go forward. And so my presentation is on genealogy as it relates to the family that Anna Barbara has shown. Okay? Go ahead. Next slide. Sorry, Rachel.
It's okay. If you want to do some quicker, you can.
Okay. So let me just begin by reading. In 1717, 20-year-old Heinrich Schlüchter was among the 90. By the way, up until yesterday, that said 80, Kathy. And I changed it to 90 because of your comment yesterday on the bus. The 90 or so settlers had come to the Germanna settlement in colonial Virginia from the Kraichgau region of present-day Baden-Württemberg. His heritage and family connections were largely unknown until research in the 1980s and 1990s revealed a more complete picture. Henry was in fact part of the extended Blankenbaker and Fleshman families of the second Germanic colony. All were related to their mother, the former Anna Barbara Schoen, who came to Virginia with her family and third husband, Cyriacus Fleshman. As it turned out, Henry was in fact a member of a significant second colony Germanic family. Yet, despite him being very well connected to this family, in less than 35 years, Henry completely disappears from the public records of Virginia and seems to vanish without a trace. Many people thought he probably died before 1750, but it's not the case. In this presentation, we'll discuss the use of DNA testing and its potential to help solve genealogical mysteries. In particular, I'm focusing on second colony descendants. However, the concepts that I'm going to present can be applied to just about any situation trying to solve unknowns about your ancestors. Next. Okay, I thought I would do this because it's a reminder of these family relationships. So Anna Barbara is the person here represented by the female symbol, and her three marriages to Blankenbaker, Schlüchter, and Kraichgau. Okay. Now, from the first marriage, I think those of you who are descendants know this already, but she had three sons and one daughter, and then Thomas Blankenbaker, her husband, died. Notice that she was only 16 years old when she got married, so she was a pretty young woman when she married Thomas Blankenbaker. He was just a few years older than her. And by the time the second colony immigrated, came here, all of these people were married. All of these four children were married. Now, after a few years, Anna Barbara remarried to Jacob Schlüchter. And they were married for a few years before they had a child, who they named Johann Heinrich Schlüchter. He was born in 1697. We have his baptismal record. We know for a fact who he was and when he was born. But unfortunately, when he was just 9 or 10 months old, his father died. And so he never knew his father, basically. His mother was obviously in maybe difficult circumstances. She's got 5 children that she has to be responsible for, and she has no husband. And so, very challenging, I'm sure. Well, a few years later, in March of 1701, she married a guy by the name of Cyriacus Fleshman, who's very consequential to the second colony and to Germanna in general. He was a leader of the group, and I think he was a recognized leader. Now, recent research has revealed, which I found really fascinating, Anna Barbara was pushing 37 years of age, and Cyriacus Fleshman wasn't even 21 years old yet. In fact, Cyriacus was just 2 years older than the Blankenmuller, oldest Blankenmuller son. So you could say that they were contemporaries. I would say that.
She was a cougar.
Yeah, she was a cougar. She was it's the Real Housewives of the Second Colony.
The title of a future song.
That's right, title of a future song. Anyway, so now it's been explained to me that in a very real sense, to Syriaca Schlüchter, it would have been a good catch because she potentially had the estates of her first two husbands and had some value, some worth. So it wasn't a bad deal for either one of them, okay? And she was still young enough that she had 3 children by him. And the first daughter we passed died as an infant or at birth. And she had a second daughter that she named after the first daughter, common practice. And a son by the name of Peter Fleshman. Now, if you're a Fleshman descendant, you probably come through Peter Fleshman. The reason that I wanted to do this visual is I wanted you to realize all of these children, these 7 children that came to Germanna were siblings. They grew up together. They knew each other. They were close. In fact, I suspect, I don't know this for a fact, Syriaca Schlüchter was, for all practical purposes, the father of Heinrich Schlüchter. And so, we tend to think, we don't know for sure that they were close, but Syriacus would have been the only father that Heinrich Schlüchter ever knew. Okay? So, I think that's important. It's an important dynamic in understanding this family relationship. And as we move forward in time over the next 20 years, it becomes really obvious pretty quickly that Heinrich doesn't have the same experience that his brothers have and the rest of his family have. Something is askew. Something isn't quite right. And I'll explain as we go forward. Go ahead. Next slide. Jen, where are we going? Jen. My helper is Slack. Thank you. Okay. Now, I did want to say something about the second colony names. Now, when I first became aware of Germanna, this confused the heck out of me. Because I didn't understand the significance of these names. They just didn't make sense to me. And but what I've come to realize is these poor Germans were dropped into, or German-speaking people, I should say, there wasn't a Germany yet, we call them Germans. These poor folks were dropped into an English-speaking world, and even though they'd had a little experience living in London for a while, nobody here supported their language. And so their names became very anglicized very, very early, okay? And what happened is, and what I think is so significant about it is, if you see these names while you're doing genealogy, and I've come across them hundreds of times in records throughout the South, if I find a Blankenbaker, there's no doubt where they came from. They came from Germanna. If I find a Clore, there's no doubt where they came from. They came from Germanna. If I find a Broyles or a Wilhoy or an Amberby, I know where they came from. And it was because of this situation that was unique in some ways. I think the Germans who went to Pennsylvania, they had a culture that supported it. And so those people tended to maintain their German spellings of their names and their German language traditions. So this is one of the really, I think, cool things about Germanna, is that these names are so unique and so specific. Kathy, do I have an agreement with this?
Jaeger is a pretty common German surname.
I get that.
And there is another Clore family spelled C-L-O-E-R from North Carolina. DNA testing has proved they are not related to the Germanna Clore family.
Okay, so the general statement that I made is probably accurate for most things.
Most purposes.
For most purposes. Yeah, push it one more time. The interesting thing is Sluder is one of those names. I just wanted to make sure that, I put it in the middle, obviously, but Schlüchter becomes Sluder fairly early. The first close spelling to the name was Sluter, found in the 1739 list of titleables that we have for the folks who lived in Germantown in the Providence River Valley. So before he got out of Virginia, his name was being anglicized to Sluder. I wanted to make sure that you understood that. Next slide, please. We were visiting yesterday at a winery that was located, I think it was on William Carpenter's property, wasn't it?
No, it was on John Hoffman's property. It was right about
Oh, it's over here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Thank you. So this map is actually turned 90 degrees, and so it throws me off. But anyway, we were visiting there yesterday, and this is the 1940 map that copy of that map that's in circulation that people have seen and have copies of. And again, it demonstrates that this is a fairly cohesive group. They stuck together. When they got released from their indenture, they all went someplace else to get out of Spotswood's shadow and started all over again. A beautiful, beautiful country. I don't know why anybody would ever want to leave there. But nonetheless, if you look at this in total, you don't see Heinrich Schlüchter. John Blankenbaker even noted in Beyond Germanna that it's unusual. He's one of the few men, when he gets here to Virginia, he's 20 years old. You would assume that he was in perfect health, he was strong, he was virile, he was all those things that a 20-year-old man should be. But he never got a land grant. Why? Doesn't make any sense. I have some theories about that. I'm not going to bore you with them, but the truth is, this is one of the indications that he had a different experience than his father and his brothers. The other is he didn't get sued by Spotswood. Now, not everybody got sued. I understand that. But he was spared that as well. So something was different about Heinrich. Let's see, what else do I want to say about this? Go to the next slide. So, when you look at Anna Barbara, we look at her legacy. And I found this quote from John Blankenbaker's book about Anna Barbara, and I think it's so precise and so right on. Couldn't push that. He says, on the way from Frankfurt to Pennsylvania, of course they didn't go to Pennsylvania, there must have been some trying times, but one wonders about the role that Anna Barbara played. She was the focal point for about 1/5 of the 1717 colony. Some of the members must have had their doubts at times, and perhaps they questioned the wisdom of various decisions. The frustration of the delay in London probably kindled sharp feelings. Next. After 325 years, her descendants had become quite numerous. And I think this is the really significant thing that everybody needs to consider. For starters, all the Blankenbakers, Schlüchters, and Fleischmans can claim her as their mother. To this add all the Thomases, the Fishers, John Michael Smith Jr. descendants, moving into the realm of probabilities. Anyone who has a Caper ancestor could claim her as an ancestor. A large proportion of the Barlows, a good fraction of the Royals, 3/4 of the Gars, 2/3 of the Utzes, and most of the Whalens would also have her as an ancestor. So, I don't know how accurate that is. I think it's fairly accurate even today. We need to realize that perhaps because of intermarriages and interrelationships, perhaps most of the people in this room have some connection to her, maybe even a genetic connection that you're not aware of. Next. This is kind of a sweet thing that John added. Anna Barbara's maiden name, Schoen, has a meaning in German. As an adjective, it means beautiful, pretty, fine, pleasant, noble, or generous. And I tend to really want to honor her if she as my 8th great grandmother who went through hell in her life. I can't imagine the things that she endured to get her family here. And so I just have nothing but respect and love and appreciation for her. I hope one of these days I get to meet her on the other side. Next. So, because of Heinrich's unique situation, for some reason or other, he never owned land. He did get a land. Syriacus did deed 200 acres to him in 1737. Even the circumstances of that deed were unusual because Heinrich didn't attend the transaction. He didn't attend the deed transaction where this property was given to him by Syriacus Fleischmann. It was deeded to his wife, whose name is Sarah. We don't know her last name. Sarah, and the deed actually says, very unusual, says that the deed was to be delivered to her husband, Heinrich Schlüchter. So we know that he was alive, but for some reason or other he couldn't attend. Well, that was in 1737, and we don't really know what happened. There's a few records that say, that tell us that property was eventually sold, and I think the last mention is about 1749 of his name in relation to the selling of his property. And then we come to this time frame, this 1750 time frame, when I believe that Henry left Virginia completely, left it behind, and moved on to a new life. Give me the first one. So there were new beginnings that were starting to happen in North Carolina. In 1744, large tracts of land in colonial North Carolina began to be offered through what eventually became to be known as the Granville Land Grants. These grants were typically around 600 acres each. The grants provided new settlers with an opportunity to obtain property. Large, 600 acres is a bunch of property, right? Being only required to pay an annual rent for that property. Word of the grants spread throughout the colonies, and many were attracted to the opportunity and headed south to North Carolina. All right? Next slide. Several Germanna families took advantage of the offering before 1750 and moved to North Carolina, settling along the Yadkin River in Anson and Rowan counties, North Carolina. These families included some of the Wallachs, and some Blankenbaker descendants. So there were people in Germanna that were looking outside to get out. Next slide. Between 1750 and 1753, land claims and court records confirmed that a man named Heinrich Schlüchter Sr. and another man named Heinrich Schlüchter Jr., who we can pretty much assume are father and son, were among the early settlers. They claimed 640 acres in what was then Anson County, North Carolina. The evidence is strong that these two Sluder men were in fact Heinrich Schlüchter of Germanna and his son, a junior, also named Henry. In 1753, the older Henry would have been about 56 years old when they moved there, and the younger Henry likely in his late 20s or early 30s. Henry Sr. probably died in North Carolina. He didn't die. Henry Jr. was married, had at least 6 children, and lived a long life in North Carolina. He had 2 sons and 4 daughters. Now those 2 sons become part of the Sluder contingent, or all of the Sluder contingent, I should say, which some went to Buncombe County, North Carolina, which is where Asheville is, and others scattered and went to Kentucky. That's where my line comes from. And Indiana, Tennessee, they went all over the place in the South and migrated. Some went to Missouri even. So within 50 years of 1800, these Sluders were all over the place. An interesting fact is every Sluder in the 1850 census, which is the first census to record where you're from, every Sluder that was 50 years old or older in the census say they came from North Carolina. So it's another indication that all the Sluders that are in the world that spell the name this way came from North Carolina. Now, next slide, please. The Sluders in North Carolina, next. This I think is really significant. It really doesn't appear that any of the descendants of Heinrich Schlüchter preserved their German heritage. And I think it would have been expected, considering the fact that there was no community to support them. I talked about this earlier. And to support either the language or the traditions that they would have had as Germans. The Sluders lived very close to the Moravian community in North Carolina, which was a large German contingent, but there's no evidence that they ever associated with them. The Walk family did, but the Sluders did not, as far as we can tell. The Sluders seem to have completely assimilated into the American English and English-speaking culture within just a generation or two. I know being brought up, I was told that my name had a German origin, but that's it. That's all I knew. Next slide. Or next, click. So there is one tiny little grace note to the Sluder story, and it's something I just came across in the last year. And it's a story regarding the Sluder German heritage. On July 11, 1813, two of Henry Schlüchter Jr.'s great-grandchildren were baptized at a place called the Ordens Lutheran Church in Salisbury, North Carolina. That's in current day Rowan County, North Carolina, if you're familiar with that. The pastor of the church was a guy by the name of Karl August Gottlieb Stork. And Pastor Stork was a staunch, traditional German. And in recording the names in their names in the baptismal entry, Stork chose to use the original German spelling of their surname instead of Sluder, S-L-U-D-E-R. So John H.2 and Catherine H. Month, both children of James Sluder, as he was known, were baptized and recorded that day with the last name spelled S-C-H-L-U-C-H-T-E-R. To my knowledge, it's the only record in North Carolina where somebody attempted to record their name as it was originally. So it's been 96 years since their great-great-grandfather first set foot on American soil. And this was apparently the very last time that anyone attempted to record the surname using that correct German spelling. So I appreciate Pastor Stork and his tenacity, I guess that's what I say. Next slide. Okay, so what does this all have to do with genetics and genetic genealogy? What's the connection? What makes it valuable for consideration in our research? Next, click. Genetic genealogy combines DNA testing and analysis techniques with traditional paper genealogical research. Next. Genetic genealogy cannot replace traditional research for names, places, and dates. Okay? So if you're in a situation like I am, and all of you are too to some extent, we don't have some cases we have names, maybe only a first name. We kind of know the place, and we have no dates. So it can't replace those things, but it can help to reveal, enhance, and clarify genealogical theories, which are then used to break down brick walls. And so it isn't a panacea. It doesn't solve every problem that you have, but it gives you clues on how to solve those problems. Next. Genetic genealogy requires autosomal DNA testing. This is very important. I know that there is an interest in Y-DNA, and there's an interest in mitochondrial DNA, but the truth is you don't need anything more than autosomal DNA for most of it. And by the way, that's the DNA testing that many of us have already taken in either Ancestry, MyHeritage, 23andMe, or Family Tree DNA. So I've tested with all four. I have my DNA every place, and a couple of other places, right? And the reason I did that was because I was trying to solve some particular mysteries. But the important thing to understand here is Ancestry has by far the largest database. It's something like 20 million people have tested now in Ancestry. And so what that does for you is it provides this incredible resource that you have so many matches to look at. Now, for some people it's completely overwhelming. There's way too many, right? So you have to kind of know how to use it, how to kind of narrow the database down to be able to be applicable to your situation. Next slide, or next click. Now, autosomal testing is used by all 4 companies, and it provides an ethnic profile, which can indicate the geographic area where your family originates. I think it's really important to understand that ethnicity is not race. Ethnicity is geography. It's where you're from. It's the physical location that you come from. And I think one of the best examples, I was talking to somebody one time and we were looking at their ethnicity and they came from Germany and they said, look at how wrong this is. My ethnicity says that I'm from Scotland. How could it possibly be? I'm German. I know I'm German. I've been German for 500 years. There's no way that I could be Scottish, right? Well, the thing that they didn't realize or think about was during the 30 Years' War, how many Scottish mercenaries came to that part of Germany? About 40,000. When you drop 40,000 unmarried men, young men, into a population, stuff happens. And the reality is the DNA don't lie. Okay, it's just the reality of human nature, and so when you look at those kinds of things, you need to realize that people move around a lot, and now the ethnicity part of DNA testing is probably the least accurate. It's constantly changing. They're comparing your DNA to a sample panel, which they believe came from a certain geographical area. So it may not be accurate, and some people like siblings test, and you know they say, well, I'm 50% Scottish. Well, I'm only 20% Scottish. Well, why is that? And it's because it's not a perfect science, and it's an educated guess. Okay, it's getting better, but it's an educated guess ultimately. So when I say it's the least accurate part of your DNA result, if you inherit segments of DNA that are an exact match that you know comes from a certain line, there's no dispute about that. It had to come from that line. Where the ethnicity estimate may not be so accurate. Next, I mentioned this already, Y chromosome, Y DNA, mitochondrial DNA, abbreviated mtDNA, are only available from family tree DNA. And they're generally used for deeper analysis. You know, Y-DNA can go back 500 years. For most of us, that's too far. It's too far. Yes, it will indicate closer relationships. I run a Y-DNA project on family tree DNA for the Sluder surname. I have about 12 men in that group, and 6 of them are close Y-DNA matches. They're all last names, with the exception of one, are Sluder. So I know that that just is more evidence that supports where they came from. Next. When you talk about DNA, how am I doing for time, Kathy?
I'm doing well. You've
Okay.
still got some time.
All right. So when we talk about DNA, it's all about everybody abbreviates, the CMs. What the heck is a CM? Now, in DNA is a molecule that's found in every living cell of our body. DNA contains the genetic code for an organism's development and function. And DNA dictates every characteristic that makes you, you. Right? It's an amazing thing. This is the blueprint of you. They could recreate you if they knew how to recreate the DNA. I think one of these days somebody will. But next. DNA is made up of 2 chemical strands, and I don't want to get too deep into all of this. I'm not sure that I even understand it so well, but when you're conceived, you get 1/2 of a DNA strand from your mother and 1/2 from your father, those come together to form you, and those combinations of DNA strands come together to make you, so that you're kind of like your sibling. You kind of look alike. You may not look anything alike, but usually you do. You sound alike, you look alike, you have the same habits and things. That's built into your DNA. But these two chemical strands form a double helix, and a double helix, imagine it like a ladder. It's a twisted ladder with rungs that reach across from one side to the other. It's held together by hydrogen bonds between what they call base pairs. So these base pairs that come together are what, again, that's the genetic code that makes you you. Half of the double helix comes from your father, and 1/2 comes from your mother. Next. This is where it gets, where we're talking about the CMs. The unit of measurement of DNA, because it is a physical thing, it is a physical length thing, is expressed in centimorgans, named after an early genetic researcher whose last name was Morgan. 1 centimorgan contains approximately 1 million base pairs in your DNA. Okay? It's a lot. Next. The total length of all your chromosomes combined is just less than 3,500 centimorgans. That's what we would measure it as. And this means that there are about 3.5 billion base pairs in your DNA. Now, the incredible thing about that is that every single living cell in your body contains exactly the same DNA. Doesn't matter if it's your spit, your tears, your elbow, your toe, it makes no difference. The cells in that part of your body carry that code. That's the reason why they can dig up somebody's bones and, if they have the right tools, extract DNA from 200 or 300-year-old individuals, and you can have a genetic profile. And then, probably the most amazing thing, the last one here, is if it were, go ahead and click it, if it were possible to stretch out your DNA. Now remember, this is the molecular level. You can barely see it with a microscope. It's so small. But if you were able to stretch this strand out, the total length of all your chromosomes combined together would measure about 2 meters in length, which is 6.5 feet. That's an amazing thought, that all of that is crunched up and put into this tiny, tiny cell that you have no perception for without a microscope or without other techniques. It's an amazing thing that exists in every cell of your body. And again, it's the reason why we can spit into a tube, and they can take that and find our DNA and give us a genetic profile of who we are. It's an amazing thing. Next. This is kind of a typical thing that they do with autosomal DNA. They show you your 22 chromosomes. Now, you're all familiar with a company called 23andMe, because the 23rd chromosome is the sex chromosome, and that's the difference between men and women genetically. We're all pretty much the same for the first 22, but the last, the 23rd chromosome determines whether you're a boy or a girl, basically, right? So, if you have 2 X's, you're a girl. If you have an X and a Y, you're a boy. It's just that simple. No argument. That's just the way it is. There are some exceptions. There's people that have genetic defects. But for the most part, the overwhelming majority of people, this is what we have. And they're shown individually by the largest to the smallest. They're actually numbered largest to smallest as well. But they actually are connected together. Okay? Something to realize. Next. Now, this is just something that hopefully you can see this. I realize some of you far, far away may not be able to perceive it, but this is you. See, it says you on it. How do you know that you? And these are your parents, and you get 50% of your DNA from each parent. So 50 comes from them, from him, 50 comes from her, and those come together to make you. Well, they in turn inherited 50% from their parents, each of their parents, and 50% from their parents. And so go ahead and click that if you would. Each of us inherits 50% of our autosomal DNA from our parents. Our parents inherit 50% from their parents, and the pattern of DNA inheritance continues back through the generations. From our perspective, you, right? As we inherit progressively smaller percentages of our DNA, the further back we go. All right? Everybody understand that? You with it? Everybody cool with that? So the next level back, this is our second great grandparent, the next level back is going to be 3.125. And the one before that is going to be 1 point, whatever, my math isn't that good. But it gets progressively smaller. And of course, this number gets progressively greater, right? It's exponential. It's by the power of 2. So you get to 10 generations. What's 2 to the 10th power? Anybody know? Top of your head? What is it? It's a bunch. It's thousands. It's thousands.
Lots of zeros after the decimal.
That's right. Lots of zeros. And that's the thing about this that you recognize pretty quickly is that you inherit from your 7th, 8th, 9th grade grandparent. You have just a very small amount of DNA that you inherit from them. That doesn't mean that it's insignificant, however. That doesn't mean that it isn't valuable, however. So, give me the next slide. So, why do we recommend testing with autosomal DNA? This is a very interesting chart that I got from the International Society of Genetic Genealogists, ISOG for short. It's an organization that supports this whole science of genetic genealogy. And it talks about, it's kind of a backwards way of looking at it, but I like it, right? The relationship is here, and what is the probability of no detectable DNA? No detectable DNA. And you see that for first and second and even third grade grandparents, there's no chance that you didn't inherit DNA from them. There's no chance at all, for all practical purposes. So that's a ways back. Fourth grade grandparent, only 0.5%. Now it started to change. Fifth grade grandparent, almost 5%. Sixth grade grandparent, it gets bigger, almost 18%. Seventh, eighth, 9th, 10th, you still, even at the 10th grade grandparent level, still have a 15% chance of inheriting DNA from that person. So you can't say that it's not valuable. It is valuable. And I'm going to show you some things with Anna Barbara. Anna Barbara is if my assumptions are correct, Anna Barbara is my 8th great grandmother. For you, it might be the 7th, it could be the 9th. I think everybody's within that range, though. 7th, 8th, or 9th great grandparent, if I'm not a bad judge of your ages. And of course, that varies too, because sometimes the generation was only 25 years, and sometimes it was 35 years, or 40 years even. I have people in my line that had children in their 70s, so it can happen. It can be closer than you really think. Okay, next slide. So, this may look familiar to some of you. It's a screen capture from Ancestry. And this is where we can get kind of, not frustrated, but overwhelmed. This happens to be my mother's genetic profile, okay? Now, my mother passed away a couple of years ago, and she was 95 years old, so she goes back quite a ways as far as the genetics is concerned. And on her maternal side, she has 33,742 matches. Just on her paternal side. On her maternal side, she has 32,471 matches. It's 65,000 plus matches. What do you do with that? It's overwhelming. But what's really cool about it is Ancestry now has released some tools that allow you to do some comparative analyses between some of your more distant matches. You still have to narrow things down, though. That's the challenge. You got to narrow it down. You got to limit the number of things that you're looking at. If you could take this 65,000 and narrow it down to a couple of hundred, it's not so overwhelming. And there's processes and ways to do it. I want to show you how to do it. Next slide. So this happens to be the top 3 genetic matches of my mother. Okay? The significant information here is, first of all, it's me. That's really significant, right? That's the most significant thing to me. And of course, I entered the information that I am her son. By the way, you'll see that I inherited 3,486 centimorgans from my mother, and that's exactly in the range that it needs to be. I told you it was about 3,500 is the amount of DNA we get from our parents. So that's perfectly consistent, and it falls within that range that we know. If I had anywhere from 3,300 to 3,700 centimorgans, we would know that our relationship had to be either a mother-son or from me being the parent of somebody. So obviously, she's 95 years old. She's not my child. She has to be my mother. It really comes down to math and probabilities. That's really what it comes down to. Now, Leanne Jones here, by the way, I just want to point out, these are the significant things you need to look at in your matches. These are our top matches, and I'm talking about looking at your bottom matches, which are going to be, 10, 12, 15 centimorgans. And the important thing, though, is that this tree situation. This says, hey, Ancestry says, hey, we found a common ancestor for you, so we think we know how you're related to this person, right? It's just their guess. But this is the significant stuff that you need to look at. What is your amount of shared centimorgans, or your amount of shared DNA centimorgans, and if you have a tree or not, okay? Leanne Jones, this is interesting because it says that they estimate that at this range of 342 centimorgans, which is 5% of your DNA shared, that she's probably in the first to second cousin range. Well, a lot of people get confused by this. This is a guess. This isn't accurate. If you click on that, it'll tell you all the possible relationships that it could be, right? So don't get caught up in that. Same thing. This information is important. She has a tree, and according to Ancestry, they looked like they could figure out a common ancestor for her. So really, really good information. Karen Supp, her third top match on the paternal side, 210 centimorgans, second to third cousin. You see she has less, and Ancestry says, well, she's not close enough to be a first to second, so she's got to be a second to third. This again is just Ancestry's way of interpreting your possible relationship. Next slide. If you click on each one of those, it'll bring up a little bit more detail of who they are. And here I am again, 50% of our relationship. This is important because, again, it tells us what our possible, I haven't mentioned it yet, but when you look at your DNA strands, they're able to say what segments, if you have a segment of your DNA that is a perfect match to somebody else. And so, in my case, I share 3,500 almost centimorgans across 25 segments of DNA, and those are pretty long segments since they're a 50% DNA kind of a relationship. But you'll see that there's fewer segments for Germanna, she's 16 segments, and even fewer segments for Karen. So we know that relationship is different. These are not from the same generation, in other words. They're separated by something. Next slide. There is a website, it's called DNA Painter, and it will allow you to take that centimorgan match, input it into this box right here, and then it will tell you what your relationship, your potential relationships are to that DNA match. Now, I know you can't read this because it's very small, but this is you in the middle, okay? Above you is your parent, below you is your child. And it tells you what the range is to be expected for that relationship. And it says that what they do is they've taken, the guy that does DNA Painter, he uses data that's from a guy by the name of Blaine Bettinger, who's been a genetic genealogist for many years and has been collecting data from people's matches. And he has projected that a parent-child relationship will have anywhere from 2375 to 3720 centimorgans. And those of course are the absolute low and high ranges. Most of us are in the middle of that, which is around 3,500. So you can look at this later if you want to. Again, it's DNA Painter. And This is what they call the WATO tool. It means what are the odds, okay? So realize that as you get smaller segments of DNA and smaller amounts of DNA, you don't know what the relationship is. You kind of have to guess. You have to look at their tree. You have to kind of, interpret what they are. And also, who else they match. Not everybody on Ancestry, if you spend any time at all with DNA on Ancestry, not everybody has a tree. In fact, probably not even a majority have a tree. They just have tested their DNA. Somebody challenged them or they wanted to learn their ethnicity, so they took this test. They have no idea. They don't have a tree. They don't have any idea of what 3, 4, 5 generations back is in their life. So it's really important to try to utilize. I can get a list of shared matches and there are 100 people and only 10 of them have a tree. Or maybe only 2 of them have a tree. I have to look at that tree, and by knowing that this group of 100 people share DNA match, I can interpolate, I can interpret how we might be related. I can actually take a group of people and say, in my line, this is my Lamb family, this is my Lanham family, this is my Sluder family. I can actually take that group and tell that they're all related that way. Ancestry can do it too. It's something they call through lines. If you've dealt with Ancestry, that's one of the tools that they have. It's all based on trees. Okay, next slide. Now, I entered 340 centimeters for Leanna into this tool because I wanted to see what the WATO tool says the relationship is. And it says that there's a 50% chance that she's a great-great aunt or uncle, a half-great aunt or uncle, a half-great niece or nephew, or a great-great niece or nephew. Well, it just so happens that Leanna is, in fact, a great-great niece of my mother's. So this tool helps you with those possibilities. Now, realize there's a fair number of possibilities here, right? So when you use this tool, you have to know that basic information. How is it possible that you're related? And again, the further back you go, the bigger that list gets. So it can be really challenging. Okay, next slide. There are factors that influence your genetic genealogy. And what are they? Number 1, pedigree collapse. Now, everybody has pedigree collapse. I don't care who you are, it happens, right? If you were to take 30 generations, right? 30 generations, just your parents, grandparents, and so forth, it's over 1 billion people. And it would put you into the Middle Ages somewhere. And there weren't 1 billion people living in the Middle Ages. And so, literally, everybody in this room is related to yourself within 30 generations, maybe within 10 or 15 generations. You don't really know. You find common ancestors in every line of your tree. It doesn't matter if you came from Timbuktu in Germany, it makes no difference. You have that relationship. Well, it might make a difference if you're from Timbuktu. I'm sorry, I should have made that that. Pedigree collapse occurs when related persons marry each other. This usually means cousin marriages, right? My mom and dad were second cousins. We knew that. They knew that, right? And I suspect that there are probably some people in here who have family members that married second cousins. Maybe not in the last 2 generations, but before them, certainly. It can include close cousins, or it can include distant cousins. But everybody has pedigree collapse in trees. It has to be, because there's no way you have that many people in the world that are your ancestors. They have to be combined at some point. Endogamy. Endogamy is an interesting thing. It's kind of like pedigree collapse, but it's like the extreme case of pedigree collapse. It's the practice of marrying within a specific group, such as an ethnic, cultural, social, religious, or tribal group. I think Germanna qualifies as a religious group. They tended to marry within their own. Endogamous populations can result from conscious decisions, cultural pressure, or geographical isolation. In these communities, everyone is related to one another in multiple ways, so people often end up marrying cousins. Now, I don't think that Germanna, per se, is an extreme case of genetic endogamy. I don't think it is. There was certainly intermarriage. And in multiple generations, you have, you know, I don't know your trees, but I'm sure there are some people in here that have Blankenbakers on both sides of their tree. There are people that have that have other Germana names on both sides of their tree. So that is in the extreme example, after 6 to 8 generations, if everybody's just marrying within each other, you become like the King of England's family. You know, they're all intermarried, and you don't know what you're going to get. Next, examples of endogamous groups include Jews, Polynesians, Low German Mennonites, the Amish, Acadians, French Canadians, and people from many Arab countries, people from Newfoundland, people from the islands, many islands. Endogamy is also a problem in early colonial American populations. So, what this means is, if you have a lot of intermarriage in your families, it means that you might get more DNA from that original person than you would expect. This is to your advantage, okay? It's not to your disadvantage. I want you to understand that. If I have ancestors and multiple of them can trace their lineage to Anna Barbara Schoen, I may have gotten more DNA from her than a person that went back with completely unrelated lines. That's really important to understand. Next, any of these factors can skew or throw off the amount of DNA you inherit from a specific ancestor. The further back you go, the more likely it is that these events can occur. And this means that you might inherit a larger amount of DNA from a particular ancestor than you expected. Now, remember, in those probabilities, you may not inherit any DNA from that person, or any measurable DNA from that person. It might be less than, so kind of the magic number that everybody goes with nowadays is like 7 centimorgans. If you have less than 7 centimorgans, you have to use special tools to do comparisons. And by the way, I run a genetic genealogy project for Germanna on GEDmatch, and there's about 400 people in there. And you can go in and run, you can lower that lower threshold down to 4 or 5 centimorgans, and you start getting a lot of matches to people in Germanna, to other people that you wouldn't imagine you were related to. And it's not illegitimate. It's actual, the real deal, okay? This lower threshold is somewhat arbitrary in that it doesn't take into consideration all of the factors that generally go into what your genetic makeup is. All right? Next slide. DNA, this is really important. Ultimately, DNA is a random process. Randomness introduces variability factors. So again, 2 siblings, you might have different results than when compared to each other. Next slide. Putting it all together with Anna Barbara Schoen. As I said, she was born in January 1664. Based on my tree, she's my 8th great-grandmother. What does that mean for me for inheriting DNA from her? Go ahead. And there's a lot of ifs here, okay? We're going to play with probabilities. If Anna Barbara is my 8th grandmother, and if I live in a perfect world where I inherited exactly 50% of my DNA following all the way back to her, from each generation of my ancestors, going back to Anna Barbara, I should have received just shy of 0.2% of my DNA from her. Okay? I can't tell you exactly which chromosome and what segment. There are tools that allow you to do this mapping that is pretty good. It's good to 4 or 5 generations. I can't tell you what DNA I got from Anna Barbara. Okay? It's almost impossible to do that. But it's still 0.2% of my DNA. Well, what does that mean? You convert DNA percentages to centimorgans, you multiply the percentage by 68. 68 times 0.2 is 13.6 centimorgans. That's well above 7. So it's possible that I could have, in that range of 12 centimorgans, a match to Anna Barbara. You can't discount it. If you go 1 generation back further, that's going to drop to around around 6 or 7 centimorgans. But I'm right on the cusp, I'm right on the edge, in my estimation, of being able to know that Anna Barbara is my ancestor, because it's all about shared matches, right? We'll talk about that next. But I should be able to find cousins that have Anna Barbara as our most recent common ancestor, our MRCA. That's a term that most of you genealogists should be aware of. That ties me and them to her. It's kind of a triangulation thing. Next slide. The key to understanding this approach is to understand that you will never match all of your ninth cousins. I believe that people that descend from her that are in my generation are going to be ninth cousins. You're never going to match all of your ninth cousins. In fact, statistically, when you get to the fourth cousin range, you only match 50% of your DNA. So if you have fourth cousins and you know they're your fourth cousins and you don't share any DNA, it doesn't mean that great grandma was fooling around. Okay? It means that the randomness and the random nature of DNA inheritance probably is the explanation. I have a lady who tested all of her aunts. She was from Mexico. She had like 9 aunts. She went down there and tested all of them. They were all in their 90s, okay? And lo and behold, I only matched half of them. Well, they were my fourth cousins or fifth cousins. And I only matched half of them. And it really bothered me for a long time. Why am I matching this one and not that one? It's because of the random nature of DNA inheritance. If your sample group is large enough, and again, I think 65,000 matches is a pretty good size sample group, okay? You will match some of your ninth cousins. And that's where this whole thing comes in. I don't care if you're looking for people, for Anna Barbara Schoen's descendants or Fishbacks or whoever. I don't care who it is you're looking for. You're going to have ninth cousins of a small number that you're going to match. That's just the truth, all right? And it's trying to figure out who they are. That's the challenge, all right? So this is why ancestry DNA testing is best for finding distant matches. The larger the database, the more likely it is that you're going to find matches. That's our goal, right? Okay, next slide. This is how you do it. This is how you start to do it, okay? In the DNA analysis portion, you go to your DNA matches. You can search for surnames in your matches trees. What did I do? What names would I search for if I was trying to find a connection to Anna Barbara Schoen? Well, guess what? The Fleshmans were half-siblings. The Blankenbakers were half-siblings. And so, I'm not looking for Sluders. I'm looking for Blankenbakers and Fleshmans. And so, you would do the same thing. You know these allied families, these people that your ancestors married into. Don't forget, don't discount that you can look at those names too. All those married names that the women married into. And you can find DNA matches by doing that. The next one. Use the surname and matches trees function to find matches to specific surname you are researching. In my case, I searched for surnames Sluder, of course, Blankenbaker, Fleshman, and even Schoen. I found a few things few matches that say I used to Anna Barbara Schoen. So, again, is this a perfect science? Does this tell you, exactly that this is your person and this is how you and that person share DNA and match to Anna Barbara Schoen? No, it's not. It's a circumstantial, evidential kind of thing, okay? But it's valid. I've talked to some of the best people in this business, and they say, yes, it's valid. These matches are good. You can say, I think I said something. Click the next one. You review the trees of each of your hits to confirm a possible connection to the ancestor you're researching. So everybody that you search in this case has a tree. So you're eliminating those perhaps millions of people that don't have a tree. You're only looking at those that do have a tree. And again, it's circumstantial evidence, but it's valid. In my case, Anna Barbara Schoen is the most recent common ancestor, distantly, right, to the Blankenbaker, Sluder, and Fleshman descendant. So that's the key to all this, is you're trying to find those other names, not the name that you want it to be. You want to find those other names. Now, there's always going to be people that have trees and matches that don't make any sense at all. Okay? When I first started doing this, I was shocked. Give me the next slide. The results. So I manage and I have access to about 35 Sluder descendants DNA kits on Ancestry. That allows me to do that search I just went through and explained to you. They're from all over the United States. They're from Illinois, Texas, Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee. And I run that test. I perform surname searches for every one of these DNA accounts using the surname blanket, Baker, Fleshman, and Schoen. And for every Sluder, I found a minimum of 20 to 30 distant DNA matches to people with those surnames in their trees. Many of them don't have a Sluder at all in their tree. Nowhere. I have a few people like my mother, who's like one generation closer to Aunt Barbara than I am. And in her case, she has hundreds of matches to these people. And again, it's a lot of work. You have to go through and look at the tree, and you have to say, is there any other possibility that I'm related to this person? If there's any other possibility that I'm related to this person in some other way. The truth is, I can't find it. There might be some third or fourth cousin somewhere that I don't know about that matches. But when you have hundreds of examples of people that match with these surnames, some of them has to be right. Probably the overwhelming majority has to be right. Almost all of these matches have no obvious connection to these families in any way, and the only possibility that makes any sense is that Aunt Barbara Schoen is your common ancestor. Okay? Next one. There are new technologies, and this is really important. There's a couple of new companies. I was at the Roots Tech conference this year in Salt Lake City, and there's a company called Banyan DNA, and they're specializing in these small segment DNA matches and helping you try to figure out how you connect with people. There's new technology on the horizon to make this good. The most important thing that you can do when you're doing your research here, don't be overwhelmed by you look at that and you say, well, it's just overwhelming. Don't be overwhelmed by it. Think outside of the box. Realize that you have these connections that you may never have explored. Consider all possible connections in each generation. This includes female marriages using their maiden name even. Okay? Do I have one more? No. Okay, so one more. I didn't leave much time. Now, again, I realize that you probably all have way too many questions. And so I'm available. I'll talk about specific circumstances with people. But are there any general questions that maybe I didn't make clear when I did my presentation? Yes?
I just have one comment. In Iceland, there's a national database. You can make sure you're not dating someone too close to you.
Yeah.
You can actually go in before you start dating, look at the name and see how they're related.
So that's an interesting concept. They did something similar in South Africa for many years, right? You had to prove you didn't have any African descent to be able to marry, or ancestors to be able to marry. And again, he talked about Iceland and the database there that makes sure you didn't marry your cousin, but it doesn't matter how careful they are, they marry their cousins in Iceland. I can almost guarantee it. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Bart?
I have a quick comment.
Yes.
Stephen runs an excellent Facebook group. It's called Genealogy for Germanna descendants using autosomal DNA. I even found a connection to Julie Bucky, who is all second colony. I'm first colony. We had a DNA match because he uses GenMatch, for our group. It's excellent. So we compared trees and we found it was a marriage, but I connect to the Royals and the Brooks. So it's kind of interesting, and Stephen does an excellent job. So if you're on Facebook, you should join that.
Yeah, if you want to learn. It's a long name. It's called Genetic Genealogy for Germanna Descendants. I think that's what it is, right? So it's way over the top name. Okay, all right, very good. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your attention. hear you again.